Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, May 24th, and today is the 231st day since the attacks by Hamas on October 7th. Greetings from Bethlehem. There's a lot going on these days. More than 100 people from around the world have gathered in Bethlehem, at Bethlehem Bible College for an event called Christ at the Checkpoint. If you are not familiar, I would encourage you to follow them online. I'd encourage you to watch the videos. Christians, Christian Palestinians from Bethlehem Bible College, but from the community have been speaking, as of internationals. I spoke today as well. But people from around the world have come together to show solidarity with their brothers and sisters in Christ, to stand alongside of Palestinians, to advocate for an end to the bombing in Gaza, to work to ending the occupation, to talk about what does it mean to be a Christian in this moment. And when I spoke today, it was not the easiest message that I've ever given. I think that I literally cried from the beginning to the end, but I hope that I was fully present. I've been trying to lean on what does it mean to embody this work, to allow the Holy Spirit to move and not only be engaged in our minds, but also our hearts and our bodies and our souls. And so tomorrow we're going to be having a virtual gathering. Many of us will be in Jerusalem, and the vigil will be filmed. We're calling it From the Fires of Pentecost to a Ceasefire in Gaza. And we'll talk about the Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages a little bit. We're going to launch phase 2 of that program. That's been one of the most encouraging things the past several months. Omar Harami from Sabeel will be speaking. Bishop Shomali, who's a Catholic bishop, Lisa Sharon Harper, and James Harris. We'll sing a few hymns. We'll do a very, very small pilgrimage that we'll have the camera with us in the Old City of Jerusalem. Sponsors are Churches for Middle East Peace, Christ at the Checkpoint, Gaza Ceasefire Pilgrimages, Sabeel, the Network of Evangelicals for the Middle East, Freedom Road, and Telos. So that's tomorrow at 4:30 Jerusalem time. Big news today, which could have significant implications. The International Court of Justice in The Hague, in the context of the case that was brought forward previously by South Africa, accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza, ordered Israel to immediately halt any military operation in Gaza's Rafah area, which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The ruling was approved by 13 of the 15 ICJ judges, and it referred to the disastrous humanitarian situation in Gaza, and it adjudicated that the evacuation efforts by Israel are not sufficient to protect Palestinians who are there. So this is not a halt on any military operations in all of Gaza, but it's specifically focused on the Rafah area. And I just spoke to a woman today who's a physician who was just in Gaza a few weeks ago. And when she talked about what the situation's like there, and when she showed just a film, words can't express how severe the situation is. The ICJ ordered Israel to keep the Rafah crossing open for urgently needed aid, to ensure that unimpeded access into Gaza Strip of any commission of inquiry, fact-finding mission, or any other investigative body mandated by the UN to investigate the allegations of genocide. A fourth order requires Israel to submit a report to the court on the ruling's implementation and its operational responses within a month. And I just recall when that happened before, the big question is the international community going to hold the ICJ? Are they going to uphold this? Because if they don't, then it's just, unenforceable. And so that's really the big question. The ICJ also called for an immediate and unconditional release of the hostages by Hamas. There was a dissenting opinion. Israel's judge, Barak, criticized the court's tendency to act every time there's a development in the hostilities and in response to public opinion, not international law, saying that these rulings would make the ICJ become the micromanager of armed conflict, a dangerous road that weakens the regime of the Genocide Convention by using it or misusing it to arbitrate an armed conflict. Hamas welcomed the ICJ ruling to halt the Rafah operation, but said it's not enough and called for an end to Israel's offensive on all of Gaza. And Hamas also said that it would cooperate with the ICJ plan to send an investigation committee into Gaza. The PA spokesperson, the Palestinian Authority, their spokesperson Nabil Rudania, said that the ruling represents an international consensus on the demand to stop an all-out war on Gaza. Jordan's Foreign Minister Safadi said once again the ICJ exposes Israel's war crimes in Gaza and calls the UN Security Council to put an end to Israel's impunity. And South African's official Dangor welcomed the ruling as groundbreaking, that the first time an explicit mention is made for Israel to halt its military operation in any area of Gaza. Netanyahu's office called South Africa's genocide accusations false, outrageous, and disgusting, and said that Israel has not and will not carry out a military campaign in the Rafah area that creates living conditions that could lead to the destruction of the Palestinian civilian population in whole or in part. And honestly, I don't know if 35,000 people, I don't know how that does not constitute a part of a population. I mean, that's tens of thousands of people. So I'm not an expert in terms of definitions, but Israel's opposition leader, Lapid, slammed the government following the International Court of Justice, saying the ruling could and should have been prevented by a sane and professional government. In terms of hostages and ceasefire negotiations, 3 bodies of additional hostages were discovered. They were recovered during an operation in Jabalia in the north. And, world leaders have been responding. I mean, this is a big, big deal. So Macron from France said that he was saddened to learn the death of Redo, who was a French-Mexican citizen. So that was one of the bodies that was found. He was a tourist at the time of the Hamas attack. He said France more than ever remains committed to the release of all the hostages. Brazil's president remarked on X that he learned of the death of a Brazilian Israeli citizen with immense sadness and called for a ceasefire and the release of the hostages. Itay Chen was a U.S. Israeli dual citizen who was killed on October 7th, and his body was taken captive into Gaza. And his parents said, we in the U.S. government have an obligation to bring back Itay's remains for burial. So a lot of response to that discovery. IDF spokesperson apologized to a family of other Israeli hostages for providing the UK's Daily Mail with a video of his kidnappers' interrogation previously unseen by them, citing human error and calling it a mistake born from the fact that we're in a global campaign. The CIA director, Bill Burns, is expected to meet with the Mossad chief in Europe over the weekend with an attempt to restart hostage negotiations and a ceasefire deal. There's not been a lot of activity in that regard. And back in the United States, the House Speaker Mike Johnson confirmed that Prime Minister Netanyahu very soon will address a joint session of Congress. This is going to be one of the most highly politicized invitations to a foreign leader in recent years. It's kind of unbelievable. Former President Trump told pro-Israel supporters at a rally in the Bronx yesterday that many of the hostages are dead. And he said this would never have happened if the election were not rigged. And in terms of the pier in Gaza, 3 U.S. troops suffered non-combat injuries in an effort to make a temporary pier off the coast of Gaza to facilitate humanitarian aid. One of them is in critical condition. Now, I don't understand why they're saying make a temporary pier. I thought the pier was done. So that sounds like an accident. I don't really know the details of that situation. U.S. and Israeli activists actually protested in support of Palestinians in Gaza outside of the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem today. And the Israeli army said it intercepted 5 drones, 2 from the east and the north, and 1 traveling toward Israel from Lebanon. So hostilities at that border continue. And then in terms of Gaza, Israel's forces stepped up strikes on Gaza with heavy fighting reported in Jabalia in the north. Tanks have pushed further into Rafah. Medics have said at least 5 Palestinians were killed when houses were hit in Jabalia. More are believed to be trapped under the rubble. The death toll, according to today's numbers, is 35,800. And those wounded is more than 80,000. Speaking on the ICC warrants against Israeli officials, Biden said that the U.S. doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC, the way it's being exercised. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did. And just what kills me about that quote is what Israel did is still happening every day. So, I mean, I don't think that comparison is ever helpful. One horror does not negate another horror. One breach of the law doesn't negate another breach of the law, but this is continuing to happen. And so I just sometimes want to shake our elected officials because sometimes their rhetoric seems to indicate that they don't really know what's actually happening. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority is having a desperate financial situation. We heard that I think the numbers, I'll have to look at my notes, but 50% or something in terms of like the pay of civil servants. And there's this whole structured tier of the way that salaries are being distributed because of such a cash shortage. And so the situation has worsened in the last 3 months, significantly raising the risk of fiscal collapse. Ireland's getting into it a little bit with Israel, saying that they're misrepresenting their views. They said what's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian catastrophe. There have been also issues between Spain and Israel. German authorities detained an 18-year-old who was allegedly discussing carrying out a knife attack at a synagogue in a German city. And then the United Nations Security Council, it's scheduled to vote today on a resolution that condemned the attack of humanitarian workers and UN personnel. That death toll is 190 UN staff killed. That's the most killed ever since the formulation of the United Nations. So it's important to note that in the most recent months of atrocities, from those on October 7th to the daily atrocities being imposed upon the civilians in Gaza, this is the longest military campaign ever in the history of Israel, with the most troops employed. It's not sustainable. The death toll in Gaza, the human cost, the cost for Israel, the cost, it's wrong. It's morally wrong. Please, like, what's happening in Gaza should stop, because the death toll is morally wrong. But it's just wrong on so many levels. And our hope and prayer, and we continue to work towards this every day, that there might be a negotiated solution, a comprehensive ceasefire, external, international pressure that could help get us beyond the tipping point so that the violence could be brought to an end. And if you're looking for communities that are like-minded, if you're feeling isolated, if you're feeling like there's no one who understands, if you feel like there's not a place where you can talk about it, we'd really encourage you to reach out. We have regional coordinators all over the United States. We do have international networks. Reach out. If you're interested in being a regional coordinator and want to mobilize people in your state, if you want to join a study group or start a study group, if you want to get your church involved, if you'd like to engage in activism or advocacy, send us an email, info@cmep.org. We'd love to hear from you. We need to come together to support one another. If you have hours or would like to volunteer, there's more than enough work that needs to be done. Might we all do our part and say enough is enough? 231 days is 231 days too many. And so we'll continue to cry out. We'll continue to do this work as we hope and work toward a better future.